Welcome to the Edufaith Essentials podcast. Edufaith Essentials is an educational podcast that provides essential information, resources, and tips about education, leadership, and topics about diverse learners. Diverse learners include students with disabilities who receive services under Section 504 or the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, response to intervention and the multi-tier system of support, English speakers of other languages, and related diverse learner categories. Edufaith Essentials' mission is to bring positive awareness and promote equity and inclusion in education by sharing information and topics about non-traditional learners. Edufaith Essentials' goal is to restore faith in education one student at a time by empowering listeners with knowledge, because we all know that knowledge is power, so let's be powerful. I am your host, Dr. Nakia, sending you good vibes and thanking you for joining me for another episode of the Edufaith Essentials podcast. Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Edufaith Essentials podcast. And let's go ahead and start with our Edufaith inspirational story. Karen York, a former special education teacher, is now a coffee shop owner, and she was honored with a community award in Surprise, Arizona. I love that name, Surprise, Arizona. York opened Spencer's Place in 2019 after she left the classroom because she realized that many of her students weren't able to find work after they graduated. Spencer's Place, which is named for her son with Down syndrome, has become a thriving business in Surprise, Arizona, with nearly half of the workforce having special needs. York's vision was to have a really good coffee shop and a good product that was enhanced with the most awesome staff that have intellectual and developmental disabilities. Patrons that visit the coffee shop are greeted at the register by someone with Down syndrome or a variety of disabilities. She mentions how the vision and opportunity has really surpassed her expectation. Due to her contribution to the community, York has been awarded the S.J. Dillon Schneider Community Award. The award includes a check for $10,000 and is given to someone in the community who gives back in a major way and motivates the people around them. Congratulations, Karen York, and thank you for being an inspiration to those in your community and providing opportunities and changing lives for individuals with special needs. And that is it for our Edufaith inspirational story. Now let's shift to some dates to remember in the month of September. September is Hispanic Heritage Month. This is a time for us to appreciate and recognize the cultural diversity and significant impact of Hispanic and Latino Americans and the contributions they've made to us and our society and in the United States. Also, September is National Deaf Awareness Month. This month highlights the needs and accomplishments of the deaf and hard of hearing community, including educational initiatives and accommodations for individuals with hearing impairments. September also marks National Spinal Cord Injury Awareness Month, which is a time where we recognize those individuals who need educational support and accommodations for needs for spinal cord injuries. And then National Learning Disabilities Awareness Month is also this month. This is a time to raise awareness about learning disabilities and advocate for the appropriate educational interventions and support for individuals with learning challenges. Now it's time for some essential news. From the U.S. Department of Education, dated August 24, 2023, the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights released a Dear Colleague letter on race and school programming to guide schools on lawful programs to promote racially inclusive school communities. The resource clarifies the circumstances which schools can develop curricular and programs or engage in activities that promote racially inclusive school communities. Title VI, a law enforced by OCR, prohibits discrimination based on race, color, or national origin in programs or activities receiving federal financial assistance, including public schools serving students in pre-K through grade 12 in colleges and universities. The resource shares with school communities practical guidance about whether and when federal civil rights laws permit, and in some cases require, schools to take action related to race, as to whether these same laws may require that schools not act based on race. Assistant Secretary for Civil Rights Catherine E. Lahman states that this resource aims to assist our nation's schools to fulfill Congress's longstanding promise that no student experience discrimination based on their race. The Dear Colleague letter includes hypothetical examples to help schools assess their Title VI legal obligations and protections concerning school-sponsored curricula and program. The resource clarifies circumstances in which schools may be in violation of Title VI when they separate schools based on race or treat individuals or groups of students differently based on race. It clarifies that schools may also violate Title VI when they create, encourage, accept, tolerate, or fail to correct a racially hostile educational environment. And additionally, the Dear Colleague letter underscores that Title VI does not restrict schools from holding assemblies, meetings, focus groups, or listening sessions related to students' racial experiences in their school or community. The resource additionally states that school-sponsored or recognized groups or programs with a particular emphasis on race, such as student club or mentorship opportunities, are open to all students and typically do not violate Title VI simply because of a race-related theme. The letter follows the release of the January 2023 OCR Diversity and Inclusion Activities under Title VI Fact Sheet, confirming for educators, parents, and students that diversity, equity, inclusion training, and similar activities are generally consistent with Title VI. OCR is available to provide technical assistance to institutions, organizations, and public members who request assistance in complying with any aspect of civil rights laws OCR enforces, including those issues addressed in the resource. Individuals with school or community questions or would like technical assistance, in that case, may contact OCR, the OCR office serving in your state or territory, and that website I will have on the Edufaith Essentials YouTube page, along with the additional information to support the initiative from the Office of Civil Rights. Also from the U.S. Department of Education, September 1st, 2023, the Biden-Harris administration highlights efforts to support K-12 education as students go back to school. The campaign was initiated by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security in partnership with the U.S. Departments of Education, Health and Human Services, and Justice. The new clearinghouse of evidence-based practices are to improve school safety is the cornerstone for the campaign of highlighting federal school safety and best practices in school. Among those things highlighted include the securing of the largest investment in public education in history to help students get back to school and recover academically from the COVID-19 academic learning loss, expanding access to mental health support in schools across the country, expanding community schools to improve academic success, expanding teacher and staff capacity to bring in tutors and mentors, growing an effective school leadership workforce from February to May 2020 for those communities who lost public education jobs during the pandemic, and support other teachers and personnel in the school setting. To find this information about the Title VI Act in the Dear Colleague letter, as well as this information from the Biden-Harris administration for the Back to School, will all be on the Edufaith Essentials YouTube page. So make sure that you go there. You can click and look at all the information and look at the information in detail. And that will do it for Essential News. Now let's dive into our essential knowledge. September is Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Awareness Month. And so what we're going to do today is talk about ADHD and just dive into attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Let's start with the definition. ADHD is marked by an ongoing pattern of inattention and or hyperactivity, impulsivity that interferes with functioning or the development. People with ADHD may experience a variety of symptoms, but they're usually one of these three symptoms I'm going to describe right now. The first one is inattention. Inattention means a person may have difficulty staying on task, sustaining focus, or staying organized. Hyperactivity or hyperactive means that they may move about constantly. Sometimes they move about constantly when it is inappropriate, or they excessively fidget, tap, or talk. Some adults with hyperactivity may have extreme restlessness or even talk too much. The third component of ADHD is impulsivity, and this means that a person may act without thinking or have difficulty with self-control. They make decisions, they interrupt others, or they make decisions without considering those long-term consequences, or seek desires for immediate rewards, or the inability to delay gratification. Some common signs and symptoms of ADHD include a person or a student may daydream a lot, forget a lot, squirm or fidget, very physically active, talk too much, make careless mistakes, have a hard time resisting temptation, have trouble taking turns, have difficulty getting along with others. They may have other severe behaviors. When we look at people with inattention, they may overlook or miss details, and it may appear that they're making careless mistakes in schoolwork or other activities. They may have difficulty sustaining attention during different tasks, not to listen when they're spoken directly to, find it hard to follow through on instructions, have difficulty staying organized, avoid tasks that require sustained mental effort, such as homework or lengthy projects, lose things for tasks or lose things a lot, lose pencil supplies, books, wallets, eyeglasses, cell phones, be easily distracted by unrelated thoughts or stimuli, forgetful in daily activities and chores and errands. When we're thinking about a person that is hyperactivity or impulsive, they may fidget or squirm while seated, leave their seats in situations, run or dash and climb at inappropriate times. Like I said, adults or teens may feel restless. They may be unable to play or engage in hobbies, be constantly in motion on the go, talk excessively. They may speak out of turn or have a hard time waiting their turn, have difficulty waiting their turn, interrupt or intrude on others. For example, in conversations, they may interrupt the conversation or an activity or a game. When looking at data and statistics and how ADHD impacts children today, according to the 2016-2019 National Survey of Parents, the estimated number or percentage of children ages 3 to 17 ever diagnosed with ADHD was 9.8%. Children 3 to 5 years were 2%, 6 to 11 years was 10%, 12 to 17 years was 13%. Boys ranged at 13% are more likely to be diagnosed with ADHD than girls, who were 6%. Black, non-Hispanic children and white non-Hispanic children are more often diagnosed with ADHD at 12% and 10% respectively than Hispanic children, which were 8%, or Asian non-Hispanic children, which were 3%. When you're thinking about diagnosis and who diagnoses a student with ADHD, primary care providers sometimes diagnose and treat attention deficit hyperactivity disorder or ADHD. They may refer individuals to mental health professionals such as a psychiatrist or a clinical psychologist who can do a thorough evaluation and make that diagnosis. For a person to receive a diagnosis of ADHD, the symptoms of inattention or hyperactivity must be chronic and long lasting and impair the person's ability to function and cause that person to fall behind typical development of others at their age. A thorough evaluation is necessary to determine the causes and the symptoms. For most children with ADHD, they receive a diagnosis during the elementary years. For adolescents or adults to receive a diagnosis of ADHD, the symptoms must have been present before age 12. ADHD symptoms can appear in children in early ages, such as 3 and 6, and continue through adolescence and adulthood. Those symptoms of ADHD can be mistaken for emotional or disciplinary problems or missed entirely in children who primarily have symptoms of inattention, leading to a delay in a diagnosis. Adults with undiagnosed ADHD may have a history of poor academic performance or problems at work or difficulty with or failed relationships as part of their symptoms of ADHD. ADHD symptoms can change over time as a person ages. As a child reaches the elementary school years, the symptoms of inattention may become more prominent and cause that child to struggle academically. When we're thinking about adolescence, hyperactivity seems to lessen, and the symptoms may seem more like feelings of restlessness or fidgeting. But inattention and impulsivity may remain in students who are adolescents or even adults. Adolescents with ADHD may also struggle with relationships or be perceived to have antisocial behaviors. Additional symptoms include inattention, restlessness, and impulsivity that may persist into adulthood. When we think about the causes and the risk factors for ADHD, they are unknown. And this is just one of those impairments that just may happen, and it may happen to a child or an individual, and there's no real rationale for why they are born with ADHD. Recent studies link genetic factors with ADHD, and in addition to that, genetics may also play a role with ADHD. Scientists are still studying the possible causes of factors, and some of those causes they include brain injury, exposure to environmental risks during pregnancy or at a young age, alcohol or tobacco use during pregnancy, premature delivery, or a low birth weight. As I previously stated, there's no real why or rationale for why an individual may be born with ADHD, but those are just some scientific research facts that scientists are considering when they're looking at why an individual may be diagnosed or be born with ADHD. When we're thinking about treatments for ADHD, when we're thinking about treatments and how we treat ADHD, research suggests a combination of behavior therapy and medication. Behavior therapy aims to learn or strengthen positive behaviors to eliminate those unwanted or problematic behavior. Behavior therapy for ADHD can include parent training and behavior management, behavior therapy with children, behavior interventions in the classroom. And for children under 6, behavior therapy is an important step before trying medication. Parent training and behavior management gives parents and skills and strategies to help their children with ADHD. Parent training and behavior management has been shown to work as well as medication for children, young children with ADHD under the ages of age 6. For individuals over age 6, parent training and behavior management is useful. Behavior interventions in the classroom are also a part of that treatment. Peer interventions that focus on behavior and organizational skills training all benefit students over 6 and adolescents when we're looking at treating individuals with ADHD. As a family or as a parent, you have to decide what works best for your child and your family. And good treatment plans will include that close monitoring, following up, and making adjustments along the way. And I want to point out that the information that I'm reading come from the National Institute of Mental Health and the National Resource Center on ADHD. All of my information is coming from both of those sites, providing the information to you on this podcast. So I provided information to you about ADHD. I provided a definition for you. I've given you examples of some signs and symptoms, what the data and research says, statistics, the diagnosis, the causes, and the treatments. All this information and the resources will be on the Edufaith Essentials YouTube page. This information came from the National Resource Center on ADHD and the National Institutes of Mental Health. So now let's shift to our essential tips. Let's start with parents first. Essential tips for parents. I am a parent of a child with ADHD, so I understand the ADHD diagnosis, and I felt that it was really necessary since September is ADHD Awareness Month that I provide just some information that I researched to help support families with ADHD and adults with ADHD. My child is thriving and he's an adult now and he's doing really well. He's in college. But I do know that ADHD can be a challenge and you have to figure out what works best for your child. You have to find out as an educator what works best for your students. And as a leader, you have to figure out what works best. Parents, first, you have to create a routine. So try to follow a daily schedule from the time your child wakes up to the time your child goes to bed. Figure out what schedule that works for you and try to keep that schedule consistently. And when you have to make adjustments along the way, make sure you inform your child and give them a heads up so you can keep everything in order. The next tip I want to give you is to get organized. So encourage some type of organization in your household. Encourage your child to put their school bags, their clothing, and all materials in the same place. Create their organization and create their routine so things flow every day and that they know that the expectation is there for them to help them stay organized. You want to make sure that you manage distractions. So a lot of times you may want to turn off the TV or limit noise and provide that clean workspace, especially when you're looking and doing homework or activities. Some children with ADHD learn well when moving or listening to music in the background. You have to watch your child and assess what works for them. But the routine, the organization, and the management of distractions will help you tremendously. The fourth tip is to limit choices. So you want to offer a few options. For example, give them a choice between this or that, this meal or that meal, or this outfit they want to wear to school or this outfit. Limit those choices so they're not overwhelmed or overstimulated. Provide clear and distinct direction and let them know that you are listening as well. One thing I used to do with my son is I used to make him look at me. So I would be clear and I didn't give a whole lot of multi-step directions. I would give one directive and then have him come back. Then I would give another directive and have him come back. And every time I gave a directive, I made sure that he provided eye contact so I knew that he was actually looking and listening. Help your child plan. So when you're doing homework, you're doing work or any daily activity, make sure you break down those complicated steps into straightforward, shorter steps. Just like I mentioned, when I gave my son directives and directions, I made sure I was straightforward. I broke those things down and I gave one-step directions instead of multi-step directions. Another tip is for you to make sure that for those long tasks that you take those breaks and maybe chunk the material or chunk the task to help limit stress. Find a way to give your child praise and praise the good things that they're doing. So you want to reinforce those positive behaviors and let your child know, hey, you're doing a good job. I'm so proud of you. Discipline effectively. Instead of scolding, yelling, or using whatever type of discipline, make sure that you use practical directions, maybe timeouts, removal of privileges, or whatever works for consequences or for inappropriate behavior. So make sure that you discipline effectively. Make sure that you're looking at discipline and redirecting the behavior and changing the behavior instead of just providing that punishment without a rationale. Create positive opportunities. Children with ADHD may find certain situations stressful, so find ways to encourage your child to do well in those other opportunities beyond academics. But you want them to do well in school, but you also may want to look at other things and tap into their other interests, whether they're video games. A lot of students or kids with ADHD love video games, sports, art, music, play. Help create those positive experiences and make sure that those experiences are balanced for your child. So you can accentuate the positives, accentuate their strengths, because every child with ADHD do have strengths. And you want to provide that healthy lifestyle. So you want to have those nutritious foods, maybe a little less sugar, a little less carbs. Make sure they're nutritious snacks, provide lots of physical activity, make sure they're on a sufficient sleep schedule and that they're getting enough sleep, because all of these things can help keep the ADHD symptoms from worsening. So parents, once again, just a quick breakdown is to create a routine, get organized, manage distractions, limit choices, be clear and specific, help your child plan, use goals and praise, discipline effectively, create positive opportunities, and provide a healthy lifestyle, which include food, rest, and just daily living. When we're looking at teachers and some essential tips for teachers, I do want to point out a couple of things for my educators, and this is for my leaders too. The American Academy of Pediatrics recommends that the school environment and program or placement be a part of any ADHD treatment plan. The AAP also recommends teacher-administrated behavior therapy for school-age children with ADHD. Parents, talk to your child's healthcare provider and then bring this information to the school and talk to the school about ways that the school can help support your child in the learning environment. Students with ADHD sometimes may qualify for services. They may qualify for services under IDEA in the form of an IEP under the other health impairment category, or they may qualify for a Section 504 plan under the Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. Both of those plans can provide accommodations and supports for students with ADHD in the learning environment. Teachers, another tip for you is to make sure that you have an organized behavior classroom management plan that encourages positive student classroom behaviors through some type of system. And you want to discourage those negative behaviors. So you want to have a behavior plan where you discourage negative behaviors, but you're reteaching or reinforcing those positive behaviors. And then teachers, you also want to make sure that you're organized and that in your teaching and instructional time, you have that proper time management and planning skills and ways to organize school materials to optimize learning for students and reduce those distractions that may come about for students with ADHD. When we're thinking about communication, teachers, you want to make sure that you're communicating with the student appropriately, but you also want to make sure that you're communicating with parents. When you're working with your students, you want to give frequent feedback and attention to positive behaviors. You want to be sensitive to the influence of ADHD and how it impacts that students as far as their self-esteem, regulating those feelings, and how you're being sensitive to how their emotionality is affected by the ADHD. So you want to make sure that you observe the student, but provide those appropriate supports in place to help boost self-esteem and regulate feelings. You want to provide extra warnings before transitions and changes in routines. And I keep saying be organized, but you want to make sure that you're giving that student a chance. Okay, in 5 minutes, we're going to put our materials away and we're going to start reading. Or in 5 minutes, we're going to line up for recess. So provide those extra warnings and transitions and changes in routines so the child is better prepared to make that transition and change. And you want to make sure that you understand the students in your classroom with ADHD. You want to make sure you understand how they learn and what supports may be necessary, and use your best practices and extra assistance to help maintain their attention in the classroom. When we're looking at assignments and tasks, we want to make sure, teachers, that you make assignments clear and you check with students to make sure they understand what they're doing and what they need to do. You want to provide choices when you show mastery. So have alternative formats for students to gain and leverage and show their mastery with their strengths. So sometimes it may be a written essay, sometimes it may be an oral report, a quiz, a hands-on project, but provide a variety of multiple modalities to show mastery for students with ADHD because they are outside of the box thinkers. You want to make sure that your assignments are not long and repetitive, but you make those assignments where you're getting or making sure that there's mastery and demonstrating mastery and provide a little challenge without the work being too hard. You want to allow students in your classroom with ADHD to have breaks. They need breaks in there. They need those brain breaks and frequent breaks. You want to make sure that allow breaks for students in your class with ADHD. Paying attention takes extra effort and it can be very tiring for a child with ADHD. So you want to make sure that you have those breaks and those time for them to take a little mental break and then come back and refocus. And then you want to allow time for movement and exercise in your classroom and instruction. So whether it's going to recess, whether you're doing some hands-on project, allow some time and movement in your class to kind of break up the monotony for a student who may have those inattention or those impulsivity symptoms. You want to minimize the distractions in the classroom. You want to use organizational tools such as a homework folder or some type of tracking where the parent knows how the student day was. But any type of organizational tool that's going to help a child with ADHD access the curriculum, complete assignments, and flow successfully in your classroom. Finally, the last thing I want to give for my leaders and my teachers is to develop a plan that fits the child. So observe and talk to the student, use the recommendations. A lot of times students with ADHD usually can have a psychological report with a lot of recommendations at the end. Read the report and see what recommendation the psychiatrist or the psychologist is providing and see how you can incorporate some of those things in the classroom. You want to make sure that you communicate with your parents regularly. And if you need to, you can involve your professional school counselor or your psychologist to be a part of helping support you and your students with ADHD in your classroom because we want all students to be successful. So just a breakdown of all the tips for my teachers: give frequent feedback and attention to positive behaviors, be sensitive to the influence of ADHD on emotions and self-esteem and regulating feelings. Provide extra warnings before transitions and changes in routines. Understand the child and understand they may have to have that attention to shift their attention and focus. So help them focus. Make assignments clear. Check for understanding. Provide multiple modalities to show mastery. Make sure assignments are not long and repetitive. Allow breaks. Allow exercise and movement, minimize distractions in the classroom, use those organizational tools, and then you're going to work with the village, the parent, the school psychologist if needed, your school leader, your school counselor, and read that psychological report and use those recommendations to determine and develop a plan that fits that child. Those are my essential tips for today. I want to also point out that on the Edufaith Essentials YouTube page, I will have the resources and the information from which I've gathered this data and presented this podcast to you. The Center for Disease Control funds the National Center on ADHD and a program called CHADD. CHADD stands for Children with Adults and Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. We used to be a part of this community when my son was younger, used for information on their website and resources for individuals and families to support students with ADHD. Also, the National Resource Center operates a call center, and I'll have that number on the Edufaith Essentials YouTube page with trained staff to answer questions about ADHD. So the support is there. Additionally, I will have the links to the National Institutes of Mental Health and the National Center on ADHD, and all this information will be on the Edufaith Essentials YouTube page. So for our book excerpt for today, I'm going to read something a little bit different. I could read my essential tips for parents or my essential tips for special education leaders, because as I mentioned, my son has ADHD. So as a parent, I went through the journey of learning that my child had the diagnosis of ADHD and feeling like I was guilty or I had done something to cause him to have that, and just going through that transition of being an educator who couldn't fix my own son who had ADHD. Instead of reading that, I do want to encourage you to grab one of my books and get essential. I'm going to read this other blog that I saw. And this is by an author. This is by Jennifer Campy. And it's a letter to teachers about students with ADHD. And I found this to be heart-tugging and inspirational. And I can really relate as a parent of a child with ADHD. So I'm going to just read that to you instead of reading the excerpt from the book. It says, to all the teachers reading this, thank you for teaching our children. It is my hope that this will offer insight into the world of a student diagnosed with attention deficit disorder, ADHD or ADD. I wish you knew that my son doesn't want to misbehave. What seems like misbehavior could be because he is overwhelmed, frustrated, or embarrassed. If he is feeling any of those emotions, his brain responds by fighting, fleeing, or freezing. It's a natural stress response. I wish you knew how stressful school is for my child. I wish you knew that my son doesn't mean to blurt out. The frontal lobe of his brain, which controls impulsive behavior, is underdeveloped compared to his peers. I wish you knew that he can't transition from joking around to getting down to business like you and his classmates can. Transitions are very difficult for him. I wish you knew that his making a joke and comments to his friends to gain attention are his way of trying desperately to fit in with his peers. He doesn't get invited to friends' homes. He doesn't play on the sports teams with his classmates, and he doesn't receive texts from close buddies. He's probably seen as immature and annoying by many of his peers. No matter how confident he may appear, don't be fooled. That is his natural defense mechanism kicking in to convince himself he is cool. I wish you knew my son needs encouragement more than any other students. He is so used to hearing, be quiet, you're not trying hard enough, that the majority of the time he feels like a failure. I wish you knew that when you acknowledge him doing something right, whether he shows it or not, it makes his day. I wish you knew when he says, I forgot, 9 times out of 10, he really did forget. It isn't an excuse. His brain doesn't hold on to things the way other students' brains do. I wish you knew how difficult it is for him to walk into the classroom and get right to work. He has just come from chatting in the hallways with his friends after sitting still and trying to be quiet for 50 minutes in another class. His brain is like, no, not again. I've got to do something fun. I wish you knew how long it takes my son to complete homework. What might take a neurotypical student 15 minutes to complete takes my son an hour. When parents of a student with ADHD ask for reduced homework for their child, we aren't trying to get out of work. We just want him to know the material, but we want him to feel confident about his ability to complete the work instead of feeling like there's no way he will ever get it finished. I wish you knew that large tasks or projects overwhelm him. The more you can break down projects into smaller tasks with due dates, the more successful he would be. I wish you knew my son is a poor self-observer. Many times he has no idea that he is coming across as disrespectful or that he is acting or saying something inappropriate. Ask him questions that help him learn to self-observe, but please do it in private. I wish you knew my son doesn't do well in unstructured class time the way other students do. If there will be unstructured class time, talk privately with him before class starts to let him know we will have quiet study time, for example, toward the end of class. I wish you knew that getting his full attention by saying his name before you start giving instructions makes the difference between him hearing all or part of what you say. I wish you knew that as a parent of a child with ADHD, frequent communication is important. I know you go the extra mile for my child when you do this, and if he has a problem, let me know. If you've assigned a project, let me know. Any and all communication is appreciated. I really do want to partner with you. I wish you knew how difficult it is for his brain to focus, especially when he finds a subject boring. The ADHD brain is actually understimulated, meaning it requires more stimulation than brains of neurotypical students. I wish you knew that when my son draws in class, it doesn't mean he isn't listening. Moving helps his brain stay focused. I wish you would be more open to offering him different ways that he can show that he knows material. He often has a hard time putting his knowledge into words, but he can express it well in his drawing. I wish you knew that my son can be a delight to have in class, and the next day he can be a disruption. The more even keel you can be with him, the better. He really doesn't want to disappoint you. He takes it hard. His inner voice tells him that he's a failure and not good enough. Finally, I wish you knew how grateful I am that you teach my son. Your job is not an easy one, nor is it for the weak of heart. If anyone understands how hard it is, I do. Your compassion and understanding towards my child will be something I will never forget. and neither will my son. I saw this article in the Attitude magazine, and it was written by Jennifer Caffey, and it was just a great article. And I saw both sides as a parent and as a teacher. A parent that has a child with ADHD, I can relate to everything she wished the teacher knew. And then as a teacher, I can also relate on the instructional side of working with students with disabilities. I didn't read the whole article. I will have it on the Edufaith Essentials YouTube page, but I encourage you to read the entire article. And I thought it was very appropriate for the topic that we're talking about today. The quote for today is from David Neeleman, and it says, ADHD isn't a bad thing. It's just a different way of thinking. You've got mail. I want to use this platform to support and spotlight fellow educators and families. If you have any questions or need any advice or want to share a great inspirational story that you want featured on this podcast, please feel free to email me at edufaithforall@gmail.com. That is EDUFAITH, the number 4, ALL@gmail.com. Edufaithforall@gmail.com. I may read your letter or feature your story. on this podcast. I look forward to hearing from you. This podcast is brought to you by Edufaith Educational Services. That is my consulting firm, and I provide services in the following areas: education consulting, including consulting for parents, educators, and leaders, college accommodation, advocacy support, consulting and training, parent educator trainings for districts and nonprofits and organizations, business and career coaching for families, business and district professional development training, particularly or specializing in services for students with disabilities, including interventions, MTSS, English speakers of other languages, education, leadership, and requested topics, program development. So if you have a program and you need support with your program or renovating a program of a service under IDEA Section 504 or any diverse learners, I can provide that training and support with program development, as well as feature my books. And finally, coaching for educators and leaders, because sometime in education, we need a little coaching and a little support to help us along our journey. If you are interested in any of those services, please feel free to email me or just simply check out my website at edufaithconsulting.com. That is www.edufaith consulting, one word, .com. So check me out at Edufaith Consulting and see what Edufaith has to offer as we restore faith in education, one student at a time. I want to encourage everyone to get essential and follow me on social media. On Twitter, I am EdufaithS. On Instagram, I am Edufaith 2021. On LinkedIn and Facebook, I am Edufaith Educational Services. And of course, on YouTube, Edufaith Essentials, which features the podcast, visuals, and all the links to all the podcast topics. So get essential. I encourage everyone once again to get essential. And to my believers, be blessed. And to all others, be well, be kind, and be the change. Please feel free to listen to this podcast as it is featured on the Edufaith Essentials YouTube page and on all podcast platforms, including Pandora, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Amazon, Spotify. And follow me on social media. Once again, thank you for joining me for another episode of Edufaith Essentials, and have a wonderful day.